Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. I'm Ethan Foster, your resident observer of human quirks and conundrums.
And I'm Alara Skye, always ready to question absolutely everything with wit and a not-so-subtle hint of comedic mischief. Today, we're shining a spotlight on something we all secretly dread, that moment when the world starts feeling like Times Square on New Year's Eve.
You mean the I'm about to hide under my desk with noise-canceling headphones moment?
Precisely. Because there's being busy, and then there's true overstimulation, which is a whole different beast. Today's episode is aptly titled Overstimulated or Overwhelmed, Unmasking the Difference, because we're looking at some key insights Dr. Mercola has shared about the difference between overstimulation and overwhelm.
Let's set the scene. You walk into a crowded coffee shop. You've got clanking espresso machines, your phone blowing up with notifications, and somewhere in the background, someone's perfume is so strong, it may have single-handedly depleted the ozone layer.
Now, is that a normal stressful situation, or is it full-blown sensory overload? According to Dr. Mercola's analysis, overstimulation is when your brain literally can't handle the onslaught of sights, sounds, smells, and everything else attacking your senses.
So, it's different from that more general, I've got too many deadlines and I still have to do the laundry feeling.
Exactly. That's more like overwhelm, an emotional reaction to stress and responsibilities. Overstimulation is about the environment. Too many inputs, too little ability to filter them. It might be bright lights, loud noises, strong smells, sometimes all at once.
So, if you're in the grocery store, struggling to remember your shopping list because the PA system is blaring elevator music and the fluorescent lights are so bright you could probably recharge solar panels under them, you might be overstimulated.
Precisely. And if you're overwhelmed, you might be thinking, my to-do list is longer than the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I just can't handle it. See the difference? One is an environmental avalanche, the other is emotional quicksand.
Let's zero in on the science for a moment. Dr. Mercola highlights how overstimulation can spark very real physical and emotional responses. Things like panic attacks, muscle tension, and this primal urge to flee.
Yes, fleeing the scene. That's often the first impulse. If you have conditions like PTSD, autism, ADHD, or anxiety disorders, that feeling can be dialed up to max volume, making it virtually impossible to stay put.
And if it happens a lot, chronic overstimulation, it can lead to burnout. So even events that are supposed to be positive can feel like too much, right?
Right. Imagine planning a celebratory dinner with friends. The idea is lovely, but by the time you're juggling reservations, loud chatter, and the swirling aromas of all those entrees, your brain might decide it's had quite enough of the festivities.
It's a weird paradox. You want to enjoy something fun, but your senses go on strike saying, nope, we're clocking out now.
It's like we have a personal bouncer in our heads who can't handle the club being too full. And sometimes, that bouncer is especially sensitive.
The triggers can be a wide range of things. We talked about loud noises, strong smells, bright or flashing lights, uncomfortable textures. Essentially, anything that your brain picks up as intense.
Or intolerable, as some psychologists put it. If you completely freeze and can't function at all, that's a big sign you might be overstimulated, not just overwhelmed.
Now, Dr. Mercola also points out that if you're chronically overstimulated, you often fall into persistent stress, burnout, and an avoidance of certain places or situations. And ironically, the more you avoid, the less you build up resilience.
It's the old trick of, don't look at the monster, it can't get you, which works about as well as telling the monster it has no sense of style. It's not a long-term fix. Real resilience involves learning coping strategies.
One strategy that gets mentioned a lot is creating space to decompress, like physically stepping away from the chaos. If the coffee shop is too loud, maybe walk outside for a moment.
And you don't have to do the dramatic I'm storming out exit. It can be subtle, like excusing yourself for some fresh air. That break can bring your heart rate back down to normal territory and prevent a full meltdown.
Dr. Mercola's piece also underscores something interesting about how a state of overstimulation differs from a run-of-the-mill meltdown. If you're truly overstimulated, you can't just muscle your way through. You may be panicked, have trouble breathing, feel dizzy. You're basically in fight or flight mode.
Exactly. Overwhelm, on the other hand, might still let you muddle through, albeit with a few groans and tears of frustration along the way. Overstimulation can feel like you're about to short-circuit if you don't get relief.
Let's talk about the longer-term picture. Chronic overstimulation leads to something called overarousal, as described in The Highly Sensitive Brain. It's that state where you're so frequently bombarded by input that your baseline becomes a sort of tense, edgy state.
And you can see how that might lead to panic attacks. Feeling trapped in an environment where every detail is turned up to 11. So you find yourself avoiding the environment entirely to avoid the risk of sensory overload.
Which can negatively affect friendships, social opportunities, and even career prospects. Suddenly, you're dodging new experiences because you're unsure how your brain will handle them.
That's a lonely road. So the book recommends short-term coping, like good sleep, healthy diet, exercise, time in nature. Basically, the greatest hits of stuff we all know we should do, but don't always do.
And then the long-term strategies involve boundaries. Maybe you don't schedule back-to-back events, or you work from home part of the week if your office is a neon-lit labyrinth of open-concept chaos.
Now, from Dr. Mercola's standpoint, there's also a nutritional angle. Having enough healthy carbohydrates can help keep cortisol levels in check. Cortisol is that stress hormone, remember? Too much, and you're basically running on adrenaline all day.
So if you're feeling edgy and about to snap at the slightest noise, it might help to ensure you're fueling your body properly. Low blood sugar can make an already tense system feel like it's on red alert.
Another practical tip: get outside for a walk. The highly sensitive brain specifically mentions downtime in nature. When you're walking under a sky that isn't blasting overhead announcements and the only bright lights are the sun rays, your nervous system can relax.
A dose of fresh air is often more therapeutic than we realize, and it's a nice break from constant screens, phone pings, and electronic hums that we might not consciously notice but can still amplify our stress.
Sleep is another big one. The fewer hours of good quality rest you get, the less resilient your nervous system becomes. It's like trying to run a marathon on a sprained ankle. Your body will protest.
Exactly. And since we're talking about personal sanctuaries, I like the concept of having a small space at home that's your retreat. For some people, it's their bedroom. For others, it might be a reading nook or a comfy chair with minimal clutter.
Having that safe haven can really help. When you sense those overstimulation warning signs, maybe your shoulders creeping up to your ears like they're auditioning to become earrings, you can slip away to your personal zone, reset, and re-enter the fray with a calmer mindset.
Let's not forget the simple yet powerful practice of grounding yourself in the present moment. If you notice that you're freaking out because of the environment, sometimes the best fix is to reconnect with your senses in a controlled way, ironically, by focusing on them.
Exactly. Instead of letting your senses run wild, you take command. Deliberately notice your breathing, the texture of your clothes, or the temperature of the air. Maybe smell something soothing, like peppermint oil. You're using the same senses that freak you out, but this time, you're the one calling the shots.
So that's the big difference. Overstimulation is not about feeling busy or emotionally swamped by obligations. It's a physiological response, a sensory meltdown. Overwhelm is that emotional reaction to too many responsibilities and tasks.
And for those curious about how to tell which is which, it helps to ask, are my senses under siege right now, or am I panicking over a tower of unpaid bills? If it's the latter, you might be overwhelmed. If it's the former, you're likely overstimulated.
In the case of sensory overload, the immediate goal is to soothe the environment or remove yourself from it. In the case of overwhelm, it might help to tackle tasks one by one or seek emotional support. Either way, you have to manage your stress levels if you want to avoid hitting that meltdown point.
Let's cover some common questions people might have about all this. For instance, what triggers sensory overload? That's loud noises, bright lights, strong smells, basically anything that's intense for the senses.
And physically, it can show up as dizziness, tightness in the chest, a feeling of being trapped. Mentally, you get racing thoughts, confusion, irritability. You might just want to disappear into the nearest quiet spot.
And is it just people with anxiety, autism, or PTSD who experience it? Nope. Anyone can, though certain conditions make it more likely. Even a single stressful event might be enough to trigger someone.
Let's also remind folks that practicing slow, deep breathing, even when you're not in crisis, can improve your ability to handle overstimulation when it does arise.
Think of it as training for your nervous system. The more often you practice calmness, the better you get at summoning it under pressure. It's like building muscle memory, but for your stress response.
Let's also not forget the notion that it's okay to set boundaries with people. If you have a friend who insists on hosting weekly karaoke nights in their neon-lit basement, it's fine to politely decline if you know it'll send you into sensory overload.
Absolutely. It's not about being antisocial. It's about respecting your limits and taking care of your mental health. If you push yourself too hard, you end up burnt out and less fun at that big karaoke final anyway.
A quick recap for anyone just tuning in. Overstimulation is a very real physiological phenomenon where your senses get overwhelmed by the environment. Overwhelm is more emotional, tied to stress and responsibilities. Both can make you feel terrible, but each has unique triggers and solutions.
And while you can't always control the world, because guess what? The world doesn't revolve around any of us. You can take steps to manage your reaction. Sometimes that's as simple as stepping outside for fresh air or politely saying, I need a minute.
Or grabbing a carb-rich but healthy snack if you realize your blood sugar is tanking and your cortisol levels are spiking. Sometimes that's all it takes to rein in the meltdown.
And it never hurts to cultivate some mindful awareness. The next time you feel that rising tension, maybe your head starts to buzz or your chest feels tight, try to identify whether it's your senses going haywire or the weight of your tasks crushing you.
Then deploy the right strategy. If you're overstimulated, reduce the stimuli. If you're overwhelmed, maybe get some help. delegate tasks, or break them down into smaller, manageable steps.
Small, concrete changes can make a huge difference. There's no need for heroic gestures. Sometimes sipping tea in a quiet corner is the secret sauce to regaining equilibrium.
Tea is often the unsung hero, yes. And with that, we wrap up another enlightening episode of Cellular Wisdom.
Dr. Mercola's insights remind us that our brains and bodies have ways of saying, enough's enough. It's up to us to listen and respond.
So, whether you're feeling overstimulated by the world's never-ending chatter, or just overwhelmed by your to-do list, remember you can find a path to calm. You don't have to be a superhero.
Exactly. You can just be a human who needs a little quiet time, the right nutrition, and a good night's sleep. That's it for today's discussion. Stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, sometimes wisdom is just knowing when to power down and enjoy the silence.
We hope you found today's topic helpful. Join us next time, where we continue exploring the deeper threads of health, life, and everything in between on Cellular Wisdom.
Thanks for listening. Stay well.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.